Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Hughes of the World. And we're rampaging through the countries that begin with A. And we're already got all the way to Antigua and Barbuda, which is going to be the subject of what I'm talking about tonight. So quick hello to Brenna, who's there already. Hello, how you doing? I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of the place, a little bit about the geography, a little bit about the people that live there, and a little bit about my experiences of Antigua when I was there back in, oh my word, February 2009. February 2009. So I haven't been for a while. This was my Lonely Planet when I was there. So it might be a bit out of date, but I've tried to update any facts and figures I give you for this year, for 2021, which is great. I've got Giorgio saying hi, man. Hello, Giorgio. How you doing, mate? So, yes, Antigua and Barbuda. What do you want? White sands, azure waters, an island where there's more people. There's more birds than people. Yes, it's Antigua and Barbuda. Obviously, I think what generally helps is if I start with a map. So I'm going to bring up a map, I hope, of the... Oh, that didn't work. Hang on a sec. I've just got to fix something. There you go. Now it's working. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a map so you can have a look at what the old Caribbean looks like. Obviously, I think I'm a bit too far north there, so I'll just sort that out. Hang on a sec. There you go. Look at that. Okay, so let's zoom out so you can see the world. Look, there's the world. That's Britain. There, that's Africa. That's Greenland, which in this map is incredibly big. It's like bigger than Africa, when in reality it's not. This is the Mercator projection. It makes things at the poles look a lot bigger than they are, and things at the equator look a lot smaller than they are. It's just the way it is. This area around here is the Caribbean, sandwiched between North America here and South America down here, as my little hand is waving about showing you. So if I zoom in, you'll see the big countries there are Cuba and Dominican Republic. And then to the right of the Dominican Republic, or east as people like to call it, you'll see this chain of islands which then descends down south towards Venezuela. And these are, at the top here, these are the Leeward Islands of the Caribbean. And then down here are the Windward Islands of the Caribbean. So Windward on the side of the wind, Leeward not on the side of the wind, on the opposite side of the wind. But what's really lovely about the island chain in the Caribbean is, apart from a few little weirdos here, like you see that says Bridgetown, that's the capital of Barbados, that's Barbados there. If you go up along here, it's almost in a line, and around here you've got the US Virgin Islands, the UK Virgin Islands, and then over here you've got Dominican Republic. You got Puerto Rico here where my hand is, and then over here you've got Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, you've got Jamaica down here, and then you've got Mexico here. So all of these countries really go in kind of a nice little line. They go in a nice little line, which I enjoy, except for the Bahamas here, which are just a big mess. But I love the Bahamas, so I won't say anything bad about them. But anyway, so I'm going to just zoom in a bit more on my quarry here. So you'll see there's a place called Basse-Terre there. That's the capital of St. Kitts and Nevis. Pronounced Nevis, not Nevis. And if we look down here, this, my friends, this, with the little airport symbol there, is Antigua. And you notice it's got a little line there for a ferry. There's a ferry that goes to, it seems to go to Montserrat down there, which is surprising. I didn't know there was a ferry to Montserrat, but there you go. You learn something every day. And there's another ferry up here to Barbuda. And this is the other... I love the fact that... But I've just discovered something about I just discovered something about Antigua. The airport on Barbuda has the designation BBQ, as in barbecue. That's fantastic. Anyway, so Barbuda over here is this is kind of like a desert island. It's a very deserted island. Can I change the layers? Can I get a map where it shows you what it's like on the island? Not really. Maybe I shouldn't do this in real time. But yeah, you can see there that Barbuda is not very populated. It's mostly land over here that no one lives in. And only about 2,000 people actually live there. but I'll talk more about that later. Oh, there you go. That's more of a nice map, isn't it? It's not so just boring. But that's a map of Antigua. There, the whole island. The big splurge that is Antigua. And so you get some kind of idea of it. English Harbour down here. I'll talk about that later. That's where I came in on a boat into St. John's. Into Antigua, and then I took a bus, a little minibus across the island to St. John's, which is over here. And I don't know if you can see the what's it called, the legend on this, but just so you know, see that box there, from there to there. That's about 4 miles. Okay, so it's not a very big place, but important in its own right. Now I'm going to just go back to me, glorious me. Yes, there we go, and say hello to. A lot of people have turned up since I've been away. Looking at maps, we've got hi Graham, looking F. Thanks, Attila. Evening, folks. Dellens 456 says, hi Graham. Have you worked out when you'll have done all the countries? Yes, in 4 years' time, because I'm going to do 201 countries. And there's 52 weeks of the year, and I'll probably end up taking a week off for Christmas or something at some point. So, yes, 4 years' time. Just saddle up, buckle in. We'll get to Zimbabwe in the end. Evening from Yorkshire, says Jeremy Goch. Hello, Jeremy. We've got Giorgio saying, looking forward to getting to Antigua. Sun and fresh water. Yes, it's a very sunny place. It's a very beautiful place. I'm going to come to that as well. Attila says, hi, Graham, looking forward to your talk. Well, I'm doing it. Chubai says, I knew the world was flat. Yes, indeed. If you go too close to the edge, you just fall off, In reality, Greenland is about 15 times smaller than Africa, says Umka. Yes, indeed it is. The Mercator map is brilliant for being able to sort of get around the world, but I kind of wish that they would just curve it up at the top, because no one goes up there anyway, and all it does is makes Canada and Russia, Russia's the biggest country in the world anyway. It doesn't need to be any bigger than it actually is. Don't tell that to Vladimir Putin, because he might stop invading his neighboring countries, his neighbors. Sorry, I'm making them his, I guess. But yeah, they're already the biggest countries in the world. They don't need to be made any bigger. Just curve them in at the top. I think there's the Mercator projection, and then there's the National Geographic style that they use, and I forgot the actual term for them, but that does curve in at the top and the bottom. Whenever I use a world map, I try to use that, and it's identifiable by the way that Australia isn't. It does look distorted. It does look more curved towards the sort of the Melbourne end of the Australian island. Love the pic of you, Graham, behind the Antigua side. I'm currently in Antigua covering cricket. Oh, Robert's in cricket. Well, this is English Harbour. This is where I had to go and try and get signed off the crew list when I got there. This is a still for my footage, which I will share at some point. I'm planning to edit these episodes down and put in my footage from my travels around the world, but obviously that's going to be quite time consuming, and I've got a million other things to do, so I'm just cracking on with it, and then maybe in a few months' time I'll be able to revisit some of these and make little sort of 5-minute videos, just the highlights and maybe some of your comments and some footage of me actually in these places. Good run from Antigua. It's very true. Sugar, big thing. It's only flat where there aren't any hills. That's Attila. Robert Miles says, have to say BA flight 10 days ago is probably 95% full and no questions asked whether the journey was essential at Gatwick. Robert, that doesn't surprise me one little bit, because there's some countries that are not particularly taking the COVID outbreak particularly seriously, and Britain is one of them. I don't know about Antigua, but yeah, Britain certainly isn't one of them. Aloha, says Beoberg. Hello, that's hello in Hawaiian. Wrong side. That's in the Pacific. We're talking about the Caribbean. So I think the way you say hello in the Caribbean is hello, usually. Unless you're on a French island, then it's bonjour. Or Netherlands, Dutch island, and then it's, I don't know, what's Dutch for hello? Oh my God, that's really bad. I should know that. Have to say, I've read that one. Alex Morgan says, good evening all. Sorry I'm late. Hope all is well. It's fantastic. Mercator was Belgian. Everything looks big compared with us. That's it from MMTB 1972. Chris Neal says, sorry I'm late. Did anyone let Graham know his hair is green yet? No, Chris, you're the first to let me know. Thanks, Chris. Good job there, letting me know my hair's green. Umka says, I'm originally from Russia, but Mercator projection makes Russia too large. It's just too big. Southern beaches aside, what are the cultural stroke artistic attractions from Giorgio? I'll talk about that in a moment. I'm going to talk about the history first. If the Earth was the scale of a snooker ball, it would be far smoother. Yes, indeed. But the Earth is not entirely spherical. It's more of a oblate spheroid, not a prolate spheroid, because that would bulge at the poles. It actually bulges at the equator, so it's a an oblate spheroid. Yeah. Anyway, so moving swiftly on, is Antigua the best place to accidentally lose your wallet? Yes, because you always get it back, Adam, Mr. Book spoilers there, because that happened to me when I was in Antigua. Okay, so let's crack on with the history of the place. So you've got Antigua and Barbuda. That's pretty self-evident. There's also a little tiny island called Redonda Island, which nobody lives in, and was just sort of claimed by Antigua when they got independence. There's second homes of some very rich and famous people. I know Oprah Winfrey has a second home there, or third home, fourth home, I don't know. Eric Clapton, Giorgio Armani, Ken Follett, all got second homes in Antigua. It's quite popular with the yacht crowd. If you go there and check out English Harbour, or Jolly Harbour, there are loads of luxury yachts. You got to understand that a lot of people who sort of sail around the Caribbean in their retirement, they're not multimillionaires. They're just in a little boat. Basically, they've sold their house at home, wherever they are, and they've bought themselves a little boat, and it's basically they're basically sea gypsies. They're sea caravan people, bouncing up and down on the waves on a sea caravan, which is nice. A motorhome, like a sea motorhome. However, there are some multimillionaires who decide let's have the biggest yacht ever, and a lot of them end up putting their super yachts in Antigua. There was one that I saw when I was there. I think it was called the Moonbird or something like that. Can't remember. And it actually it was done out in wood. It was sort of traditional Spanish galleon type affair, and it actually had sails like you expect to see on Christopher Columbus's ships or something. It had sails, but they could rotate. They could actually turn to the way that the wind was blowing to make you go in the right direction that you wanted to go without having to tack, which is sort of going up against the wind by going diagonally kind of thing. I don't know. I'm not a sailor. Don't at me. Okay, so obviously Antigua, the first things that you'll notice there is it's an old English colony, so they play cricket, big into cricket. Antigua is actually the home of Viv Richards, the famous West Indies cricketer from the... is it cricketer or cricketer? Cricketer from the 1980s who famously just won everything, almost. And I think he's a presenter now on the BBC, isn't he, Viv Richards? But he's originally from Antigua. But the population is nearing 100,000. It's nearing 100,000. The last I checked, which was just about 10 minutes ago, the highest number I could get was 97,929. Only 1,634 of whom live on Barbuda, or lived on Barbuda, which I'm going to come back to in a bit, because Hurricane Irma really ripped the hell out of Barbuda in 2017, but I'll come back to that. The highest point on the island of Antigua is called Mount Obama, named after the American president, who I don't think has ever been there, but Mount Obama, it got renamed when he became president, which is quite cool. The first permanent residents of what is now Antigua were the Arawaks, and they were there 4,000 years ago. So, back a long time. And they called the place Wadadli, which is a name that they still actually use today for the place. And they started the first agriculture 4,000 years ago. Actually, they might have been there longer before then, but we just don't have any records or anything that we can tell. Not records, but, we can't tell that they were there longer than that. But there was agriculture, obviously, from 4,000 years ago. Amongst other crops, they cultivated the Antiguan black pineapple, corn, sweet potatoes, chili peppers, guava, tobacco, and cotton. That was like 4,000 years ago, up with the times. Corn and sweet potatoes are still staples of Antiguan cuisine, and it's one of the fascinating things I found when I was in the Caribbean is if you're not going to a high-end sort of resort or place, you invariably end up just having chicken and beans and a bit of rice, and it's a bit odd. It's like, I would have expected to get more seafood. I would have expected to get seafood delights, but it's not really a big thing there for the people who live there. It's more of a thing for tourists who go over and go, yes, I want some lobster, please. And they're like, quick, get some lobster from Canada over here. True story. I'm just going to jump back into the messages before I go on. Is Antigua the best place to accidentally lose your wallet? Oh no, I've said that one. To scale, Earth is smooth enough to be a bowling ball, but not round enough. Interesting. Isn't the Earth flat? Lol, says Georgia. I would love to go to the Antarctica ones. This might be beautiful, indeed. Antigua and Barbuda, I recall some books about pirates. Only some books about pirates. Well, yeah, actually, Antigua didn't really go in for the whole piracy thing as much as other places. It was more of a sugar place, which I'm going to come on to in a bit. Graham, the Earth was the size of a snooker ball. I doubt it would bulge at the equator. Attila says, Chubba, if God had ridden the boat bicycle, the same would be true. What are you talking about? Stop talking weird stuff, people. You're scaring me. So more people have died of COVID in the UK than their entire population. Yes, more people have died of COVID in the United Kingdom in the last 12 months than actually is the population of Antigua, the entire population of the country of Antigua, which isn't quite 100,000. Their flag is in my top 10. Oh, I was going to talk about their flag. Evening, Graham. Where are the Arawaks spelling on Jamaica too? Yeah, the Arawaks were all over the Caribbean, but the Caribs came along a bit later on, and they were a bit more warlike, and they weren't too into farming and stuff. They preferred to just take. They were the Iron Fleet of the old Caribbean, which is named after them, and they actually supplanted the original inhabitants. Well, we think the original inhabitants. I mean, it might not have been the Arawaks. There might have been people there before then, but they supplanted them around the year 1200 AD. They were forced out, and the Caribs never really settled in the way that the in a way that the Arawaks had. They used the island more as kind of like a maritime base, an aircraft carrier sort of thing, in the 13th century. And they didn't really settle there as much. I was going to talk about the flag. I'll quickly do that. Janet says, hi, Graham. We're supposed to go Antigua in December, but vacation was cancelled due to COVID. Janet, it's very annoying, but if you're going to go back there, get me a ticket. Come on, I'll fly out of Liverpool Airport. Come on, me and you in Antigua. We boss. When I was in Antigua last time, I think I had a drink poured over my head by a cop ice because I think it was the last time in the derby that Everton beat Liverpool when it was like 2009. We'll have to check that. We'll check the date. Someone check Wikipedia, but I'm pretty sure that Everton actually beat Liverpool in the derby, and I got a pint poured over my head for my troubles. It was cheerfully poured over my head, yes, a pint poured over my head nonetheless. Umka says, anything about slavery on them? As soon as we start talking about sugar and tobacco, then most probably slave trade was involved there. Yes, massively. I'm going to come to that. Can I just talk about the flag first? So the flag here, I actually have on my screen here still from one of my videos where I went to the museum in St. John's, the capital of Antigua, and they've actually got the state flag of Antigua and Barbuda and what everything symbolizes. So this is what it says. It says, the gold sun symbolizes the dawn of a new era. That's nice. Red symbolizes the dynamism of the people, which I like because it usually represents blood. So thank God it doesn't represent blood for once on a flag. Blue symbolizes hope. Black symbolizes the soil and our African heritage. Gold, blue, and white together represent Antigua's tourist attractions, sun, sea, and sand. And the V, depicted in the design by the black, blue, and white band, is a symbol of victory. There you go. It was designed in 1967. I forgot the name of the guy who designed it. He was a knight of the realm. That's the flag. It is quite a 1960s sort of vibe to it, isn't it? You'd expect to see that on a tourist brochure for the logo of a holiday firm in the 1960s or 70s. It's got that kind of vibe about it. So let's jump back into the history, because we need to talk about slavery. We need to talk about slavery because Antigua wouldn't look anything like what it looks like today if it wasn't for slavery. So in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he arrived in Antigua in 1493. And he arrived. He called it Antigua after, what was it called? Santa Maria La Antigua, which was Saint Mary the Ancient, which was the name of a church in Seville. And he called Barbuda, meaning the bearded, which is interesting because I was talking about I was talking about Algeria the other day, and I was talking about how barbarians and Barbarossa, barbarians meant bearded ones, meant the bearded, Barbarossa meant red beard or rosy beard, and Barbados, the country of Barbados, which I'm going to come to in a few weeks' time when I get to my B's, means the bearded ones, and so there you go. Maybe there was an indigenous tribe living there who had beards. I don't know, but that was why he called it the beard. Well, it got called the bearded, so that's what it means, Barbuda. Whereas Antigua is the Spanish word for ancient, which means ancient. Anyway, so so it trundled along, and I don't think the Spanish had much use for it at the time. And it wasn't until 1632 that British colonists arrived, and they settled on the east side of the island, and they started cultivating indigo and tobacco. But it didn't go so well. They didn't make much money. Wasn't particularly successful. And then a few years later, in 1674, a guy called Christopher Codrington turned up, and he established Betty's Hope, the first sugar plantation. And everything went pretty much downhill from there, because sugar is an incredibly labor-intensive commodity to try and grow and cultivate and refine. And essentially, the local people had no interest in doing this. You saw this same pattern form in all places around the world, most notably Fiji, I think, where the British turned up and said, we want you to work in the fields. And the Fijians went, what? Why? Why would we do that? The fish is there in the water. We just need to take it out. The coconuts grow on the trees. We've got yams. We've got cassava. We honestly don't need to grow tobacco. What is wrong with you crazy white people? And so they refused to work. And that's why there's so many people who have Indian ancestry in Fiji. They were moved there as indentured labourers. But obviously, 95% of Antigua today has African ancestry, because the British brought over an absolutely sickening number of slaves from Africa. And bear in mind, there were more slaves brought by the British over to work in the West Indies than Americans brought over to work in America. So, there's loads of movies and loads of books and loads of film. There's loads of things about the slavery in America, which was absolutely awful. You hear hardly anything about the slavery in the Caribbean. Yeah, that's because the Americans like to make movies about the times that they messed up in the past. Whereas the British go, we didn't do that. No, we didn't do anything bad. We abolished slavery. Yeah, well, let's get to that. By the end of the 1600s, plantation economy had developed, and a huge number of slaves were forcibly moved from Africa to the Caribbean. And as I was talking about with Angola, a lot of people didn't survive the passage. They didn't survive getting over to the place. And about half the slaves that were ever taken from their village in Africa never actually made it to their destination. They died before they got there. Essentially, along with slavery and the horrors that came with slavery, the central valley of Antigua was completely deforested and planted with sugar cane, and the Caribs were wiped out. The remaining Caribs who were knocking around were wiped out. In fact, today, on the latest census that I've checked, the latest census data, there's only 200 people on the island of Antigua who regard themselves as Carib, out of a population of 100,000. That's how much the Caribs got wiped out. I mean, a lot of people do have Carib blood. They have some Carib ancestry somewhere along the line, but they don't identify themselves as Carib, as an ethnic group. Just wiped out. Just massively wiped out. And the Caribs are the reason why we call it the Caribbean, because they were the people who were there when Columbus turned up. Barbuda, meanwhile, was leased off the British government. So Barbuda at the time was a separate thing to Antigua, and it was leased off the British government to grow food for the slaves who worked on Antigua, because they wanted to use every square inch that they could of Antigua to grow sugar, because there was loads of money to be made in sugar. Now, the thing about sugar is, as I just mentioned, it's incredibly dangerous. It's an incredibly dangerous crop to try and manage. It costs a lot of man hours of work looking after the damn stuff. Then you've got to process it. So it means squeezing it to get the sugar cane juice out of it, which required people using these sort of old mangle machines. You think about the old steam machines of the 1700s and the 1800s. They were very, very dangerous, and a lot of people got killed by them. They got the limbs ripped off by them, and then you had to boil the sugar water, whatever you got out of the cane. They had these boiling houses, which again were incredibly dangerous. There was no health and safety. There was no protective gear, and again, people were injured, people were maimed, and if one of your slaves that you owned, if your thousands of slaves, hurt themselves, the usual way of dealing with this was to kill them. Because you wouldn't want to give them medical help. That costs money. Why would you do that, eh? So in I've got a date here, 1723, the British brought in the Slave Act, which made it illegal to kill your slaves for no good reason. So if you were going to kill your slaves, you had to have a good reason for it. Nice. Thanks, Britain. Bastards. By the 1770s, there were 37,500 slaves living on Antigua. That's how many people have been brought over from Africa to work until they were dead. And any uprisings were quashed ruthlessly, absolutely ruthlessly. I'll give you another example. There was an uprising, and it wasn't even a proper uprising. They just declared one of the guys who was a slave. They just declared him a king. For no one knows whether it was just for fun. They were just having a fun, bit of, jollity. But the British saw this as an attempted uprising. So this revolt led to 4 of the ringleaders broken on wheels. So, a Catherine wheel. Do you know how this works? It's basically you take a wheel from a carriage, an old horse-drawn carriage, right? You put a human being on it, and then you break their bones and twist their bones into between the spokes and the rim of the wheel. Then you put that wheel on a stick and leave them to die. So 4 of them that happened. 6 were hanged in chains until they starved to death, and 58 were burnt at the stake for having a party, basically, and declaring someone a king because they thought it'd be fun. And this is why when people say to me, oh, you can't pull down slave statues because then people won't, the statues of slavers, because then people won't understand history. They don't know any of this stuff. And even if you do tell them, they don't care. But, let's have a statue to the people who did this kind of shit. I don't think we should. I don't think we should have statues of mass murderers. I don't think we should have statues of Hitler. Just one of those things. If I was a USSR, ex-USSR country, and we had just finally gotten rid of the Russians after many, many years, I wouldn't keep the Stalin statues up. I just wouldn't keep them up. I'd pull them down. That's just me. Why would I want to celebrate a mass murderer? Any mass murderer. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. I'll go back to the messages because do the people worship Lisa Simpson? Yes. Everywhere. So they were populated by hipsters. Yeah. Brits, like Russians, are very good in sugarcoating their history. Sugar reference there. I'll come to that. Russians and Brits have always been good and perfect. That's correct. I mean, the way that British history is taught is disgraceful. It puts the emphasis on the good things that Britain did, like making slavery illegal. It doesn't focus on the fact that we were one of the main instigators of the slave trade. And it goes, okay, yeah, we were successful in fighting off Germany in World War II. I mean, that's a noble effort, isn't it? Well, a couple of things there. First of all, we didn't do it alone. We had allies, notably Russia and America. I mean, okay, those are the 2 massive superpowers that were on our side, fortunately, in the war. And also, we look at something like that we look at the Holocaust and we go, that is disgusting. That is horrific. How could anyone do that to people? When we invented concentration camps in the Boer War for South African women and children. to put them in a camp. And thousands of them died at the turn of the 20th century. We did that. So, but that isn't taught. The Irish potato famine isn't taught in school. I could go on about this all night, but we're supposed to be talking about Antigua as I keep getting pulled away. It's history normal to talk about slavery, yes. Not much place to a plantage there. Crystal said, did anyone read the President of Ireland letter in the Guardian paper addressing the past? Well worth a read. You haven't read it? No, I'll have to look out for that, Crystal. I'll make a note. Sugar equals rum. Indeed, yes, you do make rum from sugar. In France, it was le code noir, the code black, the code night. Sorry, the code night, is it? Soir is night, sorry, the code black, yeah. Evening all. Umka says, I have not been to all countries, and I don't know the history is told in schools, but I grew up in Russia and got educated there. I also read quite a number of books about UK history, and of course, plenty of BBC and Discovery Channel documentaries about history. Yeah, I mean, the history is there, but it's presented in a way that there's far too much emphasis on the good stuff that we did, and it doesn't give a balanced view of history. You can't just concentrate on the good stuff, because then you are basically damned to repeat the bad stuff, which I'm about to come on to, actually, because something happened in the 1700s. The Brits basically built a load of fortifications on Antigua, and it became their sort of big island, especially during the 7-Year War, when they were fighting against France and Spain at the time. And I think Portugal were on our side, and basically Antigua was somewhere where they had a military base there, and they knew that that was pretty impenetrable. Never got taken over. And in the 1780s, Nelson, as in Lord Nelson, famous Lord Nelson on top of his column, he actually lived in Antigua for a few years in the 1780s. And one of his big missions there was to stop the Antiguans trading with the Americans, because this was in the wake of the American War of Independence. And at the time, I'm going to quote something that I read, because I thought it'd be better for me to just quote this. The Americans had made themselves foreigner with regard to England. They had disregarded the ties of blood and language when they acquired the independence which they had been led on to claim, unhappily for themselves, before they were fit for it. So British. And he was talking about Nelson, and he was resolved that they should derive no profit from those ties now. Foreigners, they had made themselves, and as foreigners, they were to be treated. So the Navigation Act, he was there to basically prop that up and make sure that no one traded with Americans, because they had an insurrection and got rid of the British rule in America, which is kind of funny now, because it's a bit like what we've done with the EU. We've made ourselves foreigners to Europe. And although America turned out all right in the end, I just don't think there were the same boundless horizons out west for the United Kingdom. I think it's all been pretty much discovered. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. So that's why, if you go to Antigua, there's a place called Nelson's Dockyard, named after Lord Nelson. He wasn't popular. He wasn't popular when he lived there, because obviously people are like, I want to sell this American or this sugar that I've made these slaves pick and process for me. And he's like, no, you can't sell that sugar to them. You got to sell it to those instead. I want to sell it to these guys. They're closer, and it's easier. And economic gravity. Come on, Nelson, get the program. Anyway, but one thing happened around the same time, caused by Nelson's mate, Napoleon. Because I say mate, rival. Napoleon was big into his beet, man. He was big into his beets. He was big into his sugar beets. And Napoleon, more than anybody else, was responsible for the sugar beet being farmed out around Europe, which meant people in Europe could make sugar, which is a situation that continues to this day. And it's the reason why Tate and Lyle, which has its ancestry in these slave plantations in the Caribbean, fought for Brexit so hard, because they wanted to screw over the UK sugar beet farmers, because sugar beet can grow here in our climate, whereas sugar cane can only grow in places like the Caribbean. Nice. Thanks, Tate and Lyle, who also sponsored the Tory Party conference. Bastards. Anyway, so sugar beet became a thing in the early 1800s, and basically made the cane sugar that was coming all the way from the other side of the world, economic gravity, made it cost more, and so basically the arse fell out of the market, and sugar just was never as profitable as it once was. Coupled with the pullback in the British Parliament away from slavery, the abolition of slavery in Britain in 1872, and then throughout the empire in the 1830s, meant that the slaves were basically freed. But you would think maybe they would be the governments in the 1830s. They said, listen, we're going to have to pay a lot of compensation. We're going to have to pay a lot of compensation to the slave owners, not to the slaves. Not to the people who have been uprooted and had this horrific experience and been forced to work for no money and beaten and seen their friends and family murdered in front of them. No, they didn't get any compensation. The slave owners got compensation. So that was nice. And so the slaves, the former slaves in places like Antigua, where it was the majority of the people who lived there, were the ex-slaves now, they didn't have any kind of leg to stand on economically. There was no education. There was no one with a university degree or someone who knew how to start a business and start a big commerce across the sea or whatever they wanted to do. There was no one with those skills and no one who would help them. And so a lot of the black population of Antigua ended up in shanty towns, unhelped by anyone but the church. Actually, the church tried to help, but there just wasn't enough space, and so there'll be these church areas that were owned by the church, and so many people wanting to try and live there, that became just as squalid as the shanty towns. So it was a pretty difficult place to live until probably after the Second World War. And after the Second World War, another technology came along which changed the fortune of Antigua a lot, which was the jet plane. We're basically package holidays, and they got an airport, and tourism really took off. People getting cruises around the Caribbean, and people being able to fly into the country. And in 1967, after 300 years of colonial rule, self-government was declared, and it became a self-governed state of the United Kingdom. So it was still part of the UK, technically, but it was self-governed like the Isle of Man and Jersey and Guernsey and Gibraltar and stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back into the messages here. We are the baddies. Yes, we are. That's why we got the skulls on our caps. You need to talk about Jacob Rees-Mogg, about those statues, indeed. If you want to learn about history, do a degree in history. History is not written by the winners. History is written by those who are left and have money. That's kind of true. Hello, Mr. Hughes. Great series. Read your book. Thank you very much, Exunder Flory. Giorgio says, Historia Magistre Vitae, History Magistry Life, I think you're saying. Umka says, in World War II, USSR, not Russia, the ally of USA and GB. USSR consisted of 15 republics. Out of them, Ukraine and Belarus lost more people proportionately to their total population. Ukraine was terribly used by the USSR and let's say Moscow. Can we say Moscow? And just the treatment of Ukraine over the years by its unruly big neighbour has been a disgrace. It's been a disgrace. It's split into 15 countries now. It would have split into more countries if Dagestan and Chechnya had managed to break away. The Chechnyan people, they declared a republic in the mid-90s, but by that point, the USSR had shrunk down so much, and Russia's extant lands had shrunk so much, they were like, no, we're not letting anywhere else go, and that began the Chechen insurgency, which served as a very useful tool for Putin to say, oh, well, I'm just fighting these Chechens over here, because that's why I need to stay in power for the next 20 years, which he did. But there's 15 countries now where there used to be one. It used to be just USSR, but now it's 15 countries. And some of them, like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, are now parts of the EU. So they get very offended when dickhead British people go, it's the EU-SSR. They're like, excuse me? What did you just say? What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you people? Which is what most people should say to British politicians, preferably, really slowly so they might understand the actual words that are being said to them. Anyway, but this isn't Brexit reality. This is Hughes of the World. Stick to the subject. History should be taught how it's always been taught. Stop trying to change our education system. Okay, I think I'm more qualified to talk about how history is taught in the United Kingdom because I've got an A-level in history and a degree in history. So, yeah. And I've got a mate, he's done one better than me. He's got a bachelor's in history and he's got a master's in history from Oxford University, and he agrees with me. So maybe I'll get him on the show sometime. We can talk about how better to teach history. And it's not necessarily how it's always been done, because you actually want to teach people what happened rather than what you wish happened. You see the difference? There's fantasy, which isn't reality, and then there's actual reality of what actually happened. And you know what? Britain did do some good things in the past. But you've got to take the rough with the smooth. You can't just pretend that we were always the heroes in every given situation, because we really, really weren't. Anyway, so do you still have a job or already on universal credit, says Lars? Well, yeah. Tate and Lyle, who is David Davis is working for, not the people of his constituency. That's very true. Slave owners, I guess, were called honourable gentlemen in those times. Yes, they were. This is the way that they were perceived over here, as these great people who did these amazing things, in the same way that pirates were. British pirates, if you're a British pirate like Captain Morgan or Sir Walter Raleigh or Drake, you were seen as this amazing seafaring buccaneer, when the reality is those people would go out on the sea, they'll see a boat that didn't have a British flag on it, and they'll go over there, they'll kill everyone on board, they'll steal everything on board, and they'll sink the ship. So, criminals, murderers, rapists, yay, heroes. Anyway, British education at its basic level is trash. It needs changing. I think, Ben, I talked a little bit about education today in Brexit Reality, but I think that the education system doesn't necessarily need a huge overhaul, but it needs to be addressed. The fact that there are kids leaving school who don't know anything, and they don't know how to put anything together. And I keep saying this, you can't understand the history of the world unless you understand the geography of it. And so if I could tinker with the education system, I would certainly bring in a system where it all feeds into each other. So that science isn't just science, it's the history of science. It's taking it from the very simple stuff that we understood 2,000 years ago, and then making it more complex as we learned how things were actually more complex than we thought they were, and there's 118 elements, not 4. That moving that on, and then obviously bringing in science, geography, history all together to tell the story of humanity, which I think is a story worth telling, even if some of it doesn't make us look so good. So, in 1981, back to Antigua. In 1981, on November the 1st, Antigua declared independence from Britain and became an independent state. It joined the UN. The people who took over were called the Bird family, and there were 5 different birds who remained in charge until 2004, and their legacy is hilarious. I could do a whole episode on the birds, because it was all cocaine running, corruption, just generally being gangsters that ran the place. Bit like the Tories, really, at the moment. But yeah, they were voted out in 2004. Thankfully. And and then things have been going quite good for the people of Antigua for the next few years. Obviously, they were hit just like anybody else by the credit crunch in 2008. However, tourism has been booming because of the cruise ship companies coming back in a huge way. Cruise ships weren't particularly a thing in the 80s and 90s so much, and then they've massively come back now with these huge superliners, and Antigua's set up for being able to take these massive ships. And the local people think, well, I can go into agriculture or I can go into tourism. I think I'll go into tourism, thank you very much. One of the drawbacks, though, and I'll come back to this and more talk about the Caribbean, one of the drawbacks of having these big mega ships coming into the port, it's not always that good for the economy of any given country. It sounds great. Look, 3,000 people turning up in a day, and they come off the ship and they go walk around your island and they spy stuff, and then they get back on the ship and they go, wow, that's fantastic. However, the way it actually works is that a lot of people spend money in resorts, and they spend money in on activities that are owned by companies that are owned by the cruise company. So the cruise company might have a local company that does scuba diving or something, and it might choose to use them, but then it'll get a cut from the scuba diving for letting. And if they say, no, we don't want to give you a cut, they'll find someone else who does scuba diving, and they'll get their clients to book their stuff through them, because you basically, when you're on a cruise ship, you usually book everything, or any activities that you do on any given island are booked through the cruise ship itself. And that creates a bit of a false economy, and it means that a lot of the people who are actually running a lot of the things on these islands aren't necessarily from those islands. They might be a British couple or someone from America, an American entrepreneur who set something up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they're making all the money from the cruise ship company coming in each day rather than the local people. So there's some issues to be addressed there. But generally speaking, it was trucking along fairly okay until 2017, and that's when Hurricane Irma hit. Now, Hurricane Irma was absolutely devastating for Barbuda. Like, the devastation is insane. The entire island had to be evacuated in advance. A woman and a baby actually died in the evacuation, unfortunately. And then after the storm had hit, they went back and they discovered that 95% of the buildings on the island had been completely destroyed, just been taken out by the storm. And as a result, at the time, Time magazine, an estimate that they published, found that it would cost over $100 million to replace all the homes that have been lost and all the infrastructure that have been lost on the island as a result of that storm. By 2019, 75% of the population were back there. Now, don't forget, the population is less than 2,000, so it's a very small population. But rebuilding is taking place slowly, and there are still people living in tents there. They don't actually have a solid home yet. It's still being rebuilt. Obviously, that's been hit by COVID as well. But also, the government's a bit like, oh, maybe we could change things since no one's there at the moment, and they've put more money into the airport to make it bigger, and also obviously for tourism, which isn't great for the environment, and the people there don't necessarily want a bigger airport. And the other thing is that they had this system of communal ownership of Barbuda for going back centuries, and that communal ownership was being threatened by the government. So there's a few things where it's like, take one step forward, take two steps back. But generally speaking, Antigua, and oh my God, I've got 10 minutes left. I've got to stop going off on one about education and stuff, because I want to talk about what happened to me while I was there. I mean, come on, it's called Hughes of the World, isn't it? It's not like history of the world. But yeah, so Antigua is somewhere that I would recommend to go and visit. I would prefer if you turned up in a sailing boat using the wind to turn up like I did. But failing that, it's a cool place. It's a really cool place. And although the development there, especially in the capital city of the capital town, it's not really a city, the capital town of St. John's, it's quite a eclectic mix of old, nice, historic buildings, but also some horrible, nasty shit they built in the 60s and 70s, which just hurts your eyes. You're like, why did you build this in paradise? What's wrong with you people? But also that you can get out around the island, and there's a lot of nice places to see, and you've got the beaches, the fabulous, fabulous beaches. And the people are lovely. It's one of those things, it's like, it's so easy to say about anywhere that you go, but it's generally true. Most of the people that you meet are just really, really nice. Before I talk about my experiences there, I'm going to jump back into some of the messages here. UK, France, USA, Japan invaded the USSR in 2018 and got their asses kicked by the Red Army. That doesn't feature too much in Western history books. Well, yeah, a couple of years later, the UK lost the third Anglo-Afghan War. That doesn't get mentioned as well. Umka says, very alike. When I learned about the famine caused by the English on Ireland, I recall how Stalin made his collectivization, and it caused a huge famine in Ukraine in the 1930s, famously. Sean Stroik said, what you learnt in school 25 years ago, now you have to do fours in college. Okay. Education. We're not having a conversation here about other stuff. We're supposed to be talking about Antigua. And I mentioned as a little thing off the cuff that slavery, Britain's shameful period of history that was slavery, which created a lot of the countries that exist now, and the way that they are is because British people put them there, put the vast majority of the people who now live there, and then expected them to do all right on their own without much support. And now we turn around and go, oh, we want to reduce the amount of little support that we give to all these other countries that we had a hand in making what they are today, for better or for worse. And unfortunately, for 50 of the countries of the Commonwealth, which is 54 countries, we probably made it a bit worse. Anyway, stop arguing in my comments, or I will start banning people. I don't want to have to talk about other stuff. I want to talk about Antigua. So if you've got some things about Antigua to talk about, then throw it in there. Umka says, after revolution, Soviets were not legally recognized by other empires or their leftovers in different parts of the oil power as former allies for intervention. Yeah. 9 words from Drew says, oh God, okay, yeah. Is that Drew Galdron? Hello. I don't know. Umka says, and when Soviet army became finally strong and won internal war on the territory of the old Russian Empire, then other countries recognized Soviet governments. Umka, I hope you can take part in the discussion when I get to Belarus, which will only be in a couple of months' time, because that's obviously in the bees. I'm not going to get to Russia for a couple of years at least, so but Belarus will be along pretty soon, and I'll cover a lot of this stuff. Please keep your discussions civil. Yes, please, Adam. Let's change the topic. Effects on Brexit on Antigua and education on Antigua. I don't know if Brexit's had that much of an effect on Antigua, to be honest with you. It's not really a big thing over there. Although Antigua is part of the Commonwealth, and they've now lost a very important bridge that they once had between the Commonwealth and the EU, which was the UK. Now the bridges that they've got is Malta, which is a microstate, and half of Cyprus, which is in the EU. And neither of them are sort of the mother country of the Commonwealth. I know I'm not supposed to regard it like that, but that's the reality. Is it used to be the British Commonwealth, and nearly all of the countries in it were meddled with one way or another by the British in history, and it encompasses a quarter of the countries in the world. And that's phenomenal. And having that sort of soft power and having that being that kind of the bridge between Antigua and the EU was important. Not least because if you have a look at all the countries around Antigua, you've got Guadeloupe, which is French. You've got St. Martin, which is a very strange place where it's half French, half Dutch. You've got places like St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands, which used to be Danish. But the cultural dimension is there of people being able to come and go from different places and freedom of movement and all that kind of stuff, which I would like to, I'd like there to be more of in the Caribbean. One of the things that I found quite frustrating when I was there was just the lack of mobility. If you couldn't afford a flight, or in my case, I was trying to travel around without flying, but trying to get from one country to the next was quite difficult. I'll tell you the story about me getting to Antigua. So I was originally in Dominica, and I tried to get a ferry up to Guadeloupe, and from Guadeloupe, it's not that far to Antigua. However, there was a general strike at the time in Guadeloupe, and I was told pretty much don't go to Guadeloupe, don't go there, and I'm like okay, I'm not going to go to Guadeloupe. So I managed to find, my friend Dino managed to find a cargo ship that was going to St. Kitts and Nevis, which is a nation. I needed to go there, and it was leaving that afternoon. So I went along to the shipping agency and said, can I get on this boat? And they were like, yeah, sure, why not? And they let me on the boat, and I had to sleep at a table like this. Literally, I had a table, I had my bag next to me, it was like a little tiny bench, and I just kind of had to sleep like this. But it was a passage over to St. Kitts, and I spent a weekend in St. Kitts, went to see the cricket. England was playing the West Indies, which was really cool. And on the Monday, I went down to the harbour and spoke to I was with a local guy called Wayne, and he worked at the port. He worked at the harbour with all of the sailing boats, because there was no ferries. There was no ferry from St. Kitts to Antigua. There was no ferry from Antigua to anywhere else really, apart from Barbuda, which was a dead end. And so I said, can we find someone who's heading over there? There wasn't too much in the way of cargo ships that I could get on. When I say cargo ships, I mean these were really small little junk ships. They weren't massive super containers at the time. But we managed to sweet talk a Canadian guy his name was Grant, and his boat was called the Vagrant, and he let me onto his boat, and we sweet talked him by saying, Wayne introduced me and said, this is Graham, he's going to every country in the world without flying, he's trying to get to Antigua, if you're going there, could he possibly have a lift? And Grant, being Canadian, the nicest people in the world, apart from maybe New Zealanders, I think they kind of have a fight about it, but he just said, okay, climb aboard. So I'm like, great, got my bag, climb aboard, and we went over to Antigua, and we were going against the wind, so we had to tack all the way. It was all done on the sail, which is fantastic. I mean, it's a great experience sailing, except I do get seasick, I do get sunburnt, being ginge or green, and so I got there the next morning. These islands are not very far from each other. This is why it annoys me that, well, it doesn't annoy me, that's a bad word for it, but it perplexes me that there isn't more ferry services in the Caribbean between the nations of the Caribbean. They're all part of CARICOM, this Caribbean community. So why are there not ferries between them all? But one day there will be. I hope. Green ferries that manage to move across the water somehow without burning diesel. I don't know if there was some way of having like a massive sheet, some might call a sail, that got blown by the wind. I don't know. Anyway, I arrived in Antigua, and it was a great place. I really enjoyed it. I managed to get on Antiguan radio. I was in Antigua Today, the newspaper. I couch surfed with a woman called Crystal Clashing, who was an actual... She was a swimming champion from Antigua, and she represented the Antiguan swimming team in the Olympics at the time. Amazing. And she introduced me to her family, and we hung out in St. John's. It was really good. And the whole time I was there, I was trying to get off the island and get to the next place that I needed to go to, which at the time was the Dominican Republic, because all the islands in between, like St. Martin, Anguilla, the US Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, all of those islands and island groups, they're all owned by other countries. So I didn't need to go to any of them. And so I was looking around, going, anyone going to the Dominican Republic? Anyone going to the Dominican Republic? And I learned pretty quickly, and this is something that I want to share with you in case you're ever trying to hitchhike your way around the Caribbean. Don't go into a bar and say, is anyone going to Dominican Republic? Because everyone would just. If you're asking to get onto someone's boat, you're basically asking to stay at their home for a few days on the water, and there's no escape. So if you're an annoying knob, they won't let you on. If you're too pushy and you say, oh, please, and you just see it as a hitchhike, like you're sticking your thumb out on the road. No, you're not. It's a lot more than that. You're actually going to be staying with the people that you're sailing with. So what you need to do, you need to go into the pub at the nearest harbour, and just get chatting with people and just find out where people are going and what's happening, and buy people drinks and ingratiate yourself into the community. And eventually someone will say, oh, I'm heading that way. I could do with someone on board who's not a complete dick, because you're not allowed to have a boat at sea without someone on watch. It's against the law. It's against maritime law. So don't tell the Guinness Book of Records that when Dame Ellen McCarthy goes around the world, she breaks the law, because she does have to sleep now and again. But you're not supposed to have a situation in which you're at sea on a boat and there's no one awake, essentially. Whether it's a big, massive container ship or a little tiny pleasure boat, doesn't matter. You're not supposed to be asleep at the wheel, effectively, unless someone else is there to keep watch. So a couple who are traveling to another island, they might want an extra bod on board so they can have a good night's kip. And I would be that bod. I'd be just stay up all night playing my Game Boy or whatever, and hoping that we don't run into anything untoward, like a massive otter. Anyway, so eventually, after a few days, I did manage to find a couple who would take me to the next island along in the chain, which was St. Martin, this crazy island that's half French, half Dutch. And I was like, great, stepping stone on the way to Dominican Republic. I'll take it. I mean, you would, wouldn't you? And their names were Kerry and Andrew. And Andrew was from the UK. Kerry was from, but he had lived a long time in South Africa. And Kerry was from New Zealand. And they invited me on board their boat. And I needed to get stamped out. I needed to get me passport stamp and get out of there. So I turn up to immigration and I put my passport down. I'm like, so I've found the boat, I'm leaving. And they're like, yeah, we need you to be signed off the crew list from the boat you came in on. So I'm like, what? Like, you came in on the Vagrant, you need to be signed off by the captain of the Vagrant. And I'm like, he's not here. I'm like, what? He's flown back to Canada. What? Can I call him? No. Not that I had his number, even if he didn't let me call him. No, he's got to be here and he's got to sign you off his boat or you can't leave. And I'm like, this is crazy. I'm trying to leave your country. I'm not trying to steal your jobs or take benefits or whatever. I'm trying to leave. And they're like, well, you can't. So this argument went on for a long time. It was like, in fact, I think it was the next morning before they actually said, okay, we're going to sign you off. The stern-faced lady in immigration in English Harbour finally said, okay, sorry, just go. You're annoying me too much. So they signed me off Captain Grant's list, and I got on this boat with Kerry and Andrew. And interestingly enough, years later, I was in Bocas del Toro at Ginger Island, and I had gone to the local KFC. By KFC, I mean Ernie's Fried Chicken Emporium, which was this ramshackle pier into the waters of Tierra Oscura Bay, and it was miles away from anywhere. And you could go there and get the best fried chicken in the archipelago. Actually, the best fried chicken in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And I was there, and I was chatting to a woman who lived nearby on another island. And she was telling me about this time that a boat went down off the coast of Panama, and her and these other yachties were trying to save the boat, and they managed to rescue the people off the boat. And try as they might, they couldn't actually save the boat itself. It eventually sank. And how much of a tragedy it is to see a beautiful yacht sinking beneath the waves, when it's run into trouble. And she happened to mention the name Kerry as she was telling me the story, because there was a woman called Kerry who was involved in the rescue, who tried harder than anyone else to try and save this yacht. And I said, was it Kerry from New Zealand and her husband Andrew? And she's like, yeah, that. I'm like, oh my God, it's the same person. So small world, very small world. So I catched a lift with them from Antigua to St. Martin. But back to Antigua. Antigua, I found it a delight. And I think it's one of those things we go, well, Graham, what's there to do there? What's there to do? And you're like, well, you've got the whole Caribbean thing. So you've got the Caribbean vibe, you've got calypso music, you've got reggae, you got the sort of crazy beat music that comes from Guadeloupe. That seems popular there. And then you've got these amazing natural beauty wonders, especially under the sea. If you go out snorkeling, you go scuba diving, and you've got all the magnificent white sand beaches. And that should be enough. But what I think is really cool, was just the people. It was just how lovely the people were, and friendly and welcoming. And that makes all the difference as far as I'm concerned. When I go somewhere and it's like, London, and it's like no one wants to look you in the eye or say hello. If you say hello to them, they think you're a massive weirdo. I'm like, don't get a very good vibe from this place. But Antigua was not like that. I didn't get over to Barbuda. I would like to go back there, so maybe I'll go back with Janet next year once COVID's over, and I'll check out Barbuda, and I'll be able to tell you more about it. Hopefully it will be rebuilt by then, and the people who lived there will be rehoused and everything. But that storm was absolutely devastating to the people of Barbuda. And also, I mean, it hit Antigua, but to a much lesser extent. Ben Vose has given a super chat. Thank you, Ben. You're amazing. Thank you. He says, been a fan basically since the Odyssey Expedition pitch video. Keep up the good work, Graham. Cheers, Ben. Oh my God. The pitch video for the Odyssey Expedition was 13 years ago. Umka says, by the way, it's interesting. Did the Brexiteers ever thought about the Commonwealth and perspective of Commonwealth members' interests? Not what Britain's pretend Commonwealth is, but its reality. No, they didn't. No one thought about anybody else with Brexit. No one thought about Antigua or Zimbabwe or Fiji or India or anywhere really, apart from, I didn't even think about Britain. If they did, they wouldn't have voted for Ireland to become reunited and Scotland to get independence. Anyway, Jeremy Goff says, I was on a baby container ship at Seaforth. It was still massive, very few crew, and the engine room was immaculate. That's from Jeremy Goff. Yeah, I travelled on a few of the big ships. The biggest one I went on was a 12,000 TEU ship, which took me from Mauritius to Durban in South Africa, and it was a Maersk. It was a big Maersk ship. I think it was a Panamax ship. It might have been post-Panamax, actually, but it was bloody big. It took a long time to walk from one end to the other. And, the engines, the size of the engines on these things, the engines are the size of a house. It's just unbelievable. And I was on one ship where they needed to stop because they were coming in too quick. You know, they needed to stop because they would have arrived in their destination like 2 hours early. And obviously, you've got to keep to your shipping timetable as best you can. And so what they did, because it's so much of a hassle to power down the engines, right? They didn't power down the engines. Instead, they just did a big loop. So if you zoom in on my old GPS logs, you can actually see I'm going down the coast of Australia, and suddenly the boat just goes straight out for like a good few, miles. And then it just turns around and comes straight back and then continues down the line that it was originally on. Take that, environment. Anyway, it's not easy being green. Seasickness makes it easier, indeed. I can imagine having no hope to move out to see the world, especially today when you see a lot about others on the internet. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We're all in the same boat at the moment because none of us can really travel. One of the reasons why I started doing this now is because I was like, why are you doing a travel show when no one can travel? I'm like, well, it's not really about travel. It's about each country in the world. And I think it's worth having a discussion about it and talking about these different places and what they're like and my experiences there, which are unique to me, obviously, but also a little bit about the history and what the flag means and all that kind of stuff, what the name means. This means ancient and beards. So there you go. I'm going to knock off now because it is, oh my God, it's 8 minutes past 11. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to get a copy of my book, Man of the World, head over to my website where you can get a signed copy. I'm going to write this into the thing now. Very professional, Graham. I should have this already written out, so I can just copy and paste it. If you go to grahamdavidhughes.com and you can get yourself a signed copy of Man of the World. It's also available as an ebook and as an audio book, if you want to get that. Also, you can chip into the me writing Top of the World, the sequel to it, which still isn't finished, but it will be soon, I hope. Right, we need to know where to get drunk at the moment. Yes. At the moment, I think the place to get drunk is basically your own home, unfortunately. Next week, Argentina. Sorry, Senna. Yeah. I've actually got it in my notes here, like, next, Argentina. So remember, it is Argentina next. Argentina comes next, alphabetically. So I'll be talking about the amazing country of Argentina. I'll be talking about Buenos Aires and the incredible Foz de Iguazu, the massive falls that are on the border with Brazil and Paraguay. And my experiences in Argentina. I've been there twice in my life, and both times was absolutely bloody amazing. So please tune in next week when I'll be talking about Argentina on Hughes of the World. And until then, I'm just going to say fair winds and following seas. Bye-bye.